Hey everybody, a video here for you today, and I might have another one coming up a little later. I've got one that's almost finished off, just set to music, a place in Peru that I have not made a video about yet, so that will probably be coming a little later. But I've been going over questions and comments. I'm making another Q&A video, comments and questions I didn't go over in my last Q&A video, and that one's just really slow putting together. But a lot of comments and questions are related to my pyramid series. What is the function of these places? What is this all about? Did the Egyptians just come along and build on top of some original structures? And those are all great questions. But before I go searching for an answer, I really need to document what was found in all these places. But I talked about ancient Meidum about 6 months ago in my pyramid series, but this is a place that needs to be talked about again. And didn't really know too much early in my pyramid series, but what was found down here I think is pretty amazing. But first of all, just going over some old stuff here. The Meidum pyramid, maybe the best example in all Egypt of a more modern structure built on top of a very ancient superstructure, and that is clearly evident here by this strange building on top, obviously much more modern, and then a huge buried superstructure. Here is Mastaba 17, and this is a massive complex, and underground here, and what was found, I think it's pretty amazing. But Petrie was here about 125 years ago, and he documented what was below here. And here you have another Mastaba, and this is Mastaba 16, I believe it is referred to. And this is pretty much buried. But this reminds me of the pyramid of Sekhmet, where the golden alabaster sarcophagus was found. And I think that's the problem with this mystery. You have all these places that people call them pyramids, or then they say, well, this is a Mastaba, or this is an unfinished pyramid, and there's just kind of a big mishmash of what these places are actually called and intended for. But if I just document all these places, is there going to be an answer? Well, maybe. Here you can see the causeway from the Meidum pyramid down to this ancient Mastaba, and I think these are very, very old. And these are made, I believe, at the same time, maybe as the Great Pyramid. And I'm going to show you some pics and just do a little reading here, but I found a good paper relating to this ancient structure here, and I think it's very old. Now this paper, Mastaba 17 at Meidum, a layman's guide, was written by Keith Hamilton, and I read this about 6 months ago, or just portions of it. And I think Matt over at Ancient Architects used something written by Keith Hamilton, so that name kind of sounds familiar. But I thought this was excellent. I'm not going to read a lot, but I'm just going to show you some pics here. Here is the ancient Meidum Mastaba number 17, located, and this is looking from the Meidum pyramid. And Petrie, when he was here over 100 years ago, he was pretty blown away by what he found in here. He did some diagrams of drawings, and he was pretty amazed how they just seemed to be cutting into the earth for these structures here at Meidum. And here's a pic. It seems they were cutting tombs into this structure. Here you can see a fine limestone base and a floor that went around this place, and that is also evident around the Great Pyramid. And here you can see this base. It's like four, these are massive stones, and they're four on top of each other at least to create the base out here. Here you can see some more evidence of that. And here you see how these are fitted together perfectly to make a floor, and these have just been covered up over time. More evidence of that ancient flooring, and that is evident at some of the most ancient pyramid sites in Egypt. Now here is a pic. I think this is over 100 years old, from Petrie. What did he find? Descending shaft, central chamber. Does this look like the Zayat al-Aryan photos or the Jeffrey photos? Well, they seem to be exactly the same. Now here's a pic of some descending chambers and tunnels below here. Here are some diagrams. Those are pretty faint. But here is what was found below here. A descending shaft, and these walls were made of perfectly fitted and put together blocks here, and then a massive sarcophagus. This is what was found below Mastaba 17. And here are some pics of the lower tunnels down here that Petrie accessed, and he might have been the first one in here in a long time, because there was massive granite blocks plugging up this place just like all these other old places. Here is a hole cut in one of these perfectly made walls below this mastaba that Petrie theorized looters cut this to gain access to the burial chamber. Here is a look in a tunnel below the mastaba. More look at the tunnel below the mastaba. A tunnel that goes way down below here. Descending tunnel. I would not want to go down there. I think that would freak me out a little. More subterranean tunnels. And here you get a good idea of how this stonework and these tunnels were carved. Pretty remarkable, and they go for a long way, it seems. And once again, here is this, and he goes over the dimensions of this place pretty good, but this sarcophagus is just fitted into this last niche here perfectly. How would they get that underground into such a tight-fitting compartment? I kind of wonder that. But just going over some more photos here. Here is what he theorizes is a tomb raiders entrance. But if tomb raiders were cutting this, how did they get the big sarcophagus down here in the first place? Here is another pic, and this looks exactly like those interior chambers in the Devil's Punch Bowl down at Abydos, the tomb of Osiris. And here you can see a guy standing next to these big blocks, and that'll give you an idea of how big this passageway was. More looks at the interior chamber. But the sarcophagus that was found down here is very impressive, and here you see these granite walls. But here, I believe we are getting closer to the sarcophagus, and this is pretty impressive. Here is the lid of the sarcophagus. And here is a look at what Petrie found. The lid, which is slightly askew, and this is all uninscribed, and I'll give you a little better look here. And further down, this is a diagram. And just get a load of how big these blocks are and what all the detail that went into this. Who in the heck was building this and when? I think we're looking back, way back in history here. But that is pretty staggering there, that diagram. Now, here is a look at the sarcophagus. Probably some modern little scribbling here, but nothing inscribed in this. And I think it's about 2 feet thick, the sides of this. And if you just read, and I'll leave the link below, but there seems there would have been an overhang based on the dimensions of the sarcophagus and the lid. Here is a look at the inner part of it. Could the Egyptians made this with their tools? That is pretty incredible if you ask me. Just the sheer size of it, the thickness, and how they got it down here in the first place. And here's a diagram of how they think the lid just slid right on here. But this is just massively thick, and just doesn't seem to be very Egyptian at all. Could this have been a sarcophagus from pre-dynastic times? Well, that is a possibility for sure, especially after what was found in here, because there was something found in here. Now, Wainwright, who went to Egypt with Petrie, writes about the body that was found in here. It says, the condition of the body itself is of great interest, as although most of the wrappings had gone to dust, yet a considerable quantity remained in the situ, strong enough to bear handling and examination. The main examples were on the left radius and ulna, which still bore wrappings to the thickness about 1/2 inch and on the neck vertebrae wrappings about 1 inch thick still remained. On the examination of the left radius and ulna, it was found that no particle of flesh or skin intervened anywhere between the wrappings and the bone, the linen lying directly on the bare bone. Is that strange? Yes. The two bones were correctly adjusted and had been wrapped as one, the linen being so well wadded between them so absolutely to touch and give the idea that each had been wrapped separately. There were also scraps of linen adhering the hollows of the wrist sockets and on the bearings of the elbow joint, but this linen was almost like the remains of dust, I guess, when it was examined. Says the right humerus still preserved bandages all over the joint, while the left humerus also had a quantity of thick bandages on it. Many of the other bones also show clearly remains of linen adhering directly to the bone itself. Wainwright goes on to describe the body in more detail. The eyes had been replaced with balls of paste. The septum of the nose was intact, so the brain must have been removed through the foramen magnum. 3 packages found in the sarcophagus were found to contain only vegetable matter, and those packages that were returned to the body only contained a part of the organ, the rest of the package being made up of vegetable matter and mud. And by the way, mud, he says down here at the bottom of here, there seems to have been a layer of silt that washed in all at once and hardened. And if this mastaba is, I don't know how many feet above the dry Nile River Valley, and then the Nile itself is many miles out there, what time exactly in history would a flood washed a huge layer of sediment down this mastaba? I wonder about that. Now, here is a pic of the skull that was found in this sarcophagus. Does this look like a dynastic Egyptian mummy? Not at all. Not at all. This seems to be something entirely different. Now, here are some other things that were recovered from this mastaba, but this skull, I guess, just when Petrie was traveling, or the people who had the skull, that just the jostling of the voyage reduced this skull to just fragments, so it cannot be studied today. This does not look like anything from the Egyptian mummifications. And he just goes on to the strange way that this body was like wrapped separately. And it just says, I have not been able to find any detailed papers on the burial practice we see in Mastaba 17. Dismembering of bodies can be traced back to pre-dynastic times, and one source I found suggests this practice appears to disappear about the 5th dynasty. Whether this is some sort of excarnation ritual carried out like can be seen in other cultures, I know not. Though it is interesting to note that the skin was not totally removed from the head, but the skin seems to be missing from the rest of the body, which is very strange. Now, just finishing it off, it says the remains of large bird bones in the sarcophagus are also a bit of a mystery. The humorous side of me would like to think that some vulture had perhaps eaten too much. But it says we are unlikely to learn more of the body of Mastaba 17. My understanding is that the bones were sent to London and subsequently destroyed, courtesy of the Blitz. So I guess we have no way to do any testing to find out how old this skull was that was found in this strange mastaba that has very ancient substructure to it. Now, how old is this? That is a great question. It does not appear to be a dynastic Egyptian mummification in any way, shape, or form. Could this skull go back thousands of years from this mastaba? Well, I guess it's possible, because this just looks really strange. There are huge questions. It goes into Petrie's research of these structures just west of the Meidum pyramid. It says, and this is Petrie writing, over 100 years ago. It says the great tombs are of one type. A long trench was sunk into the ground, 80 feet long, 22 feet wide, and sloping down southwards to 36 feet deep. Does that sound familiar? There are some inexplicable features about these tombs which are unlike any of that we know of elsewhere. First, there was no trace of a superstructure, such as a mastaba or an offering chamber. I had the ground very carefully trenched to the east of the pits, but no trace of brick or stonework could be found. It seems that these structures were intended to be hidden tombs, filled up and left like the rest of the desert surface. Second, there seems no reason for excavating a trench in the rock twice as wide necessary for the chamber and then filling it up with large blocks of stone. This cannot be due to an afterthought. There is an immense tomb of this type at 3 furlongs northwest of the pyramid, but it seems to have been destroyed, and we only cleared the outline of the trench. And that is just part of the mystery down here at Meidum. I think it's a big mystery what was found down here. This strange skull. How big was this person? Well, apparently he was normal sized, about 5'8". I know people are going to ask that question, but this just appears to be something very ancient and not in any style that I'm familiar with. And I will admit that the styles I'm familiar with are like Middle Kingdom and the 18th dynasty mummies that have been found. So I am familiar with later periods of Egyptian mummification, but I don't know any that look like this and were devoid of any skin, except a little bit around the head. That is very strange, and it seems to be a whole different other period of mummification. I just wanted to say that. But the skull didn't even make it back to the initial transport. It was in such bad shape it just kind of fell apart. The skeleton was shipped to London, lost in a World War II bombing raid, I guess. That's the story. But that is the mystery at Meidum. I think we have some very ancient structures down here. And these are probably the structures that Petrie was getting into. Just shafts cut in the earth, perfectly aligned. That's the way it sounds from his description. There is a few others found out here. There is a huge another mastaba right here, number 16, that appears similar to some other places. And by the way, lost pyramids, ones that I have not mentioned on my pyramid series that just appear to be lost pyramids, not in any pyramid list. This is ancient Meidum. This is not on any pyramid list. I think that's a lost pyramid right there for more than a few reasons, but I'm not going to talk about that today. But that appears to be a lost pyramid. That is a lot of talking, but a strange skeleton found down in a huge, massive, uninscribed sarcophagus. This mystery is very hard, and that's why I like it. The harder the better, as far as I'm concerned. Hope you thought that was cool, and you all have a very nice day.